poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Aloha and hello. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Brad Wilson. And today's guest on the show is the founder of Solve for Why, Nosebleed Cash Game legend, and one of the best souls in the entire poker world, Matt Berkey. In case you aren't up to date on your CPG history, Berkey was guest number 1 way back when CPG launched in late 2019. Since that initial conversation, I've grown to learn that Berkey is one of the most honest, generous, and genuine human beings I've ever had the pleasure of getting to know, and I feel very blessed to call him my friend. And before you hop into today's episode, I would like to add an update. When Berkey and I recorded this conversation, a subscription to Solve for Why had been priced at $9.99 per month, down from their pre-pandemic price of $149.99 per month. But starting back on April 1st, 2021, the cost of a subscription will be going up to $49.99 per month. That is still a 66% discount from where it was a year ago and one of the very best values in the whole poker world. With that said, in today's show, Berkey's about to take you on a trip using the Wayback Machine and tell you stories about his biggest influence in pursuing poker, the time he made a huge hero call in a home game with a bunch of colorful characters, including a hitman that led to him getting frozen out of the game, and the powerful life lesson he learned from his less than spectacular college baseball coach. You're also going to learn the power and responsibility poker coaches have when giving feedback to their students, why Berkey and I think progress in poker software and training has forced us out of our poker adolescence, what Berkey sees as the next step in the solver evolution, and much, much more. So without any further ado, I bring to you the founder of Solve for Why, the one and only Matt Berkey. Berkey, welcome back to the show, man. It's been a long time. How you doing?
Good. How have you been?
I've been doing well, just holed up in my cave for the past year or so, not getting out and making a bunch of podcasts. How has Solve for Why been during the pandemic?
It's good. Yeah, I feel like it was a bit of a loaded question since we caught up for an hour prior.
Yeah, but, we've been talking for literally an hour here before we started the actual conversation.
Yeah, no, Solve for Why is good. I actually had a pleasant surprise. I was putting together the quarterly projections for this year, and I hadn't done it yet, but I went back and looked at last year's financials. We had our biggest year.
Really?
I don't know how. We had one academy. So we lost $500,000 in revenue from the academy. We dropped our subscription price from $100 to $10. And somehow we grew 30%. I don't get it.
Well, I guess, like we were just talking about the pandemic, people are staying inside and watching a bunch of shit on their computers. So I think too, like the upside of your subscription model is that it's so fucking cheap that like, who's going to cancel it? Because it's like so valuable and so cheap. It's like, it's honestly takes more effort to cancel it than to just let it run, even if you don't watch any content for a few months.
No, that's true. That's true.
Well, cool, man. I'm glad that Solve for Why is treating you well. Glad you're healthy, all that stuff. But I wanted to ask you, who's your biggest influence in becoming a professional poker player?
That's kind of an interesting question because it takes me way, way back. Obviously, I've been playing like what I would consider to be professionally since 2003. And I was super, super against the idea of this being a career path. Just growing up, I think just like growing up outside of Pittsburgh in, a very blue collar type of city, this wasn't really, I was all about bucking trends and not going the traditional route. Like, don't get me wrong, I never wanted to work a 9 to 5, but playing poker professionally wasn't exactly entrepreneurialism, at least not back then. So I think that there was a certain stigma around gambling. I had never gambled prior to playing poker and never really gambled outside of playing poker. So I guess, I wanted to live up to those more traditional standards, despite the fact that I never really wanted to work a 9 to 5. With that said, one of my best friends growing up, Brian Lamanna, who actually still works for me now, was very much of the opposite mindset. He was the one closest to me who was also kind of like introducing me to the game and pushing me to lean into what I was good at. We were naturally very good at different things, and I think he recognized some things in me that lent my skill set.
What are you good at? What are you good at? What's he good at?
He was very disciplined, which I know surprisingly I should be the disciplined one in the group, but like I'm not when it comes to decision making. I'm very spontaneous. I'm very erratic. Well, at least in my younger days, anyway. Probably a lot more calculated now, but
unless it comes to nailing down time zones.
yeah. Apparently, I'm not good with detail, man. At the end of the day, I am super not good with detail. I'm very much a big picture guy. But yeah, I give in to whims pretty easily, and that's not great in poker. If you just want to see a guy's hand, that's not really a good mindset to be operating from. He was incredibly critical about the way that money went into pots, and it allows him to win for the better part of a decade. I was very much into the meta, into the psychology of it all. I just felt like I had a really great read on people, and that was something that he always observed and noticed in me too, especially like in 03. I mean, we kind of joke about it now because it's unfathomable to some of the young guys who are playing the game at this point. But like in 2003 to 2007-ish, we weren't that far removed from what you see portrayed in Rounders. A hand over a mouth or a wipe of the brow. Like people literally wore their hands on their face. And I was just pretty dialed into that aspect of poker as a whole.
Yeah, I can tell you that most of the conversations with my friend and I, beyond just the strategy, I would say probably 70% of it was like, did you feel like he was strong? What did he look like? What were his mannerisms? Yeah. I mean, it was all physical and reading our opponents. And like, I think EQ gets a bad rap, and like quote unquote field players just get an especially bad rap in the poker community. They're like, oh, you can't prove it. You're just like a field player. And people like assume that like field player means that we're feeling something and then acting based on our feeling, when it's not the case. It's We're reading other people's emotions and how they feel and acting on that, right? Which isn't a thing that you can kind of quantify and hold a manager 3. You can't just filter for like opponent felt uncomfortable on river. So it's a harder thing to quantify, but it's absolutely a major part of winning poker in the live realm and even in the online realm, to be honest with you. Like there's a lot of reads that you can get based on timing tells and all sorts of things that I think are just undervalued by the community at large. But back then, man, it was a really big deal. And I think it's today is still a really big deal. But
I agree. I think that it's an added layer where you can derive edge. I don't think it should be the backbone to your strategy. Obviously, you need to play sound poker still. But you could draw pretty easy parallels, right? So if you were to observe somebody who was lost on a hike or had their car break down, they would look a certain way, right? They wouldn't look like the same version of themselves walking down a busy street towards work or sitting in the comfort of their own home, right? Like all of those demeanors are very different, and it's just born out of simple survival instinct, right? We have this fight or flight system that triggers certain mannerisms, certain bodily movements, certain responses, such as high pulse or shallow breathing or whatever. And it's ignorant to just ignore it unless it's of no value to you. And the people that it's of no value to are people who probably largely ignore that aspect of themselves, right? Where it's like they just want to be students of logic and rational thinking and robotic as humanly possible. Just remove all the variables. But it's added info,
You're playing as human beings who have emotions. You can't just flip the switch and say, oh, no emotions today, right? Like imagine the worst day of your life, right? Where you're just in total despair and agony. Could you just flip a switch and not feel it? Is that like a possibility on the worst day of your life? No, you're an emotional creature. You're going to feel it. And I'm not sure if I've talked about this on the show, but like I consider myself, because I put in a ton of time playing live. I've been a professional, since 2003. Like there was a thing that people used to do back in the day where it was such an obvious physical tell. It makes me laugh now that I think about it. But they would like make a bet on the river
and they would like grab their hand and like hold it over the muck, right? Like when they think the opponent's going to fold, they're like, yeah, come on, let's move on to the next hand. Like, let's go. And it's like, it's always the nuts. Like, it's just always super strong. And I got it in my head that like one day against a really good player, I'm going to do this as a reverse tell. And we play a big pot. And like I said, hardened poker warrior. Like I get my cards, I uncap my hand and I put it over the muck. And like, I'm telling you, this was the hardest fucking thing. It was like trying to put two magnets together that are like up, the same pole. Like, my body refused to cooperate. It was like, don't do this. Please don't do this. What are you doing? Don't do it. I did do it. And the guy instantly folded, which was great. But it just made me realize like how fucking hard it was for me to do as a bluff. And it was like, man, my body just did not want to do that. And like, that's the power of emotions while you're playing poker. This is, again, somebody that had probably played thousands of hours at that point. And it was hard for me. So and it was
pre-planned.
Right? Like it was like in my mind is something that I'm going to do one day. Mm-hmm. So somebody that's like inexperienced in a pressure cooker playing poker, of course their emotions are going to betray them. And of course you can get reads.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more.
So going back to your story, I don't know how I took us down that tangent, but you and your friend, y'all are opposite. He's the disciplined one. You're the one with the high emotional intelligence. So I guess continue on.
Yeah. So I guess by this point, I graduated college in 2005. So like at this point, it was time to make a decision. He was already 2 years into just like straight rounding. He dropped out of college sophomore year. He had now moved into my college apartment, and we were going to a lot of underground games, things like that. And I just remember there being a discussion at one point where I was very adamant that I didn't think this could be done professionally. And he was strongly in the other camp. A second conversation took place post-graduation where he was just like, I'm a professional poker player now. And I kind of was just like, yeah, I guess you are. Like, you've been living independently for 2 years. You don't need money from anybody. You have a reasonable working bankroll. And I was kind of in the same boat. Like, I'm self-sustaining. I have working capital. I have all of these opportunities to games. And he was just like, we're doing this. And at that point, it was just kind of like, okay, like, I think that this is a viable thing. I'll sit down at some point and do some cost benefit analysis and figure out, what's the worst case and but like the alternative is I become a computer programmer. I fucking hate it. Right. Like I dragged my feet through school. I never went to class. I spent 10x the amount of time in the gym as I did in the classroom. And, my heart was broken from not becoming a professional baseball player. So it's like, am I really going to sit down and write like millions of lines of codes for the next 2-3 decades of my life? Well, when you put it that way, it was like, I'm out.
Yeah. No brainer. I want to point out the irony here though, that like professional poker, you didn't think was viable career path, but professional baseball player, that was the
no brainer. And the thing was like, I didn't even think I had to get lucky to have that come to fruition. It was just like, nobody wants it more than me. That's enough.
Yeah, that's enough. Like only like almost no one actually becomes a professional baseball.
That literally meant nothing to me. You could have told me that 1% of people make it or 0.1%. And I would have just been like, whatever, I'm still in that group. I don't care.
I mean, that's probably the mindset that you need to have to actually go pro. Because if you did know the reality of the situation, you would that'd probably be pretty tough.
It's helpful to have talent also though.
Yeah. Talent does help.
Yeah. I kind of like that part.
Yeah. That's a major factor as it relates to going pro in pretty much anything.
Yeah.
So 2005, you're doing it. You're going down the path of being a professional poker player and pretty much never look back from that point, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there were a lot of hiccups along the way. But Brian was an amazing, support system in the early goings of things. And then we branched out a little bit. I've been friends with Brent Hanks since 2005. We used to play the same game at Salamanca Casino in New York. We moved out to Vegas together, the three of us and a couple others. So I always had this nice little tight support group. And I've always been very much of the mindset of like your opponents are your enemies kind of thing. So I never really strayed outside of that. Like I didn't build this big social network. I didn't want it, right? I never wanted to, especially like back then, because strategies weren't necessarily figured out. You were mostly playing the man. And when you develop some sort of meta or dynamic with somebody where it's like, well, we're friends and we've talked hands before, and like, you know, something along the lines of like, well, I know that he knows that I know that he knows that. I didn't want to go down that path. It was just like, I want to hate all of you. I want you all to hate my face. And we want to exchange big amounts of money between one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty common mentality, especially from a competitive standpoint. I know that a friend of mine, Adam, the guy that was in the Olympics, won a gold medal, he told me that like his coach in the Olympics, they did visualization exercises, and they would visualize that like, you know, they were Olympic rowers and world champions and favored to win the Olympics. And they would visualize that like the other person's boat like capsizes. And in the visualization, it was like, you're going to take your oar and you're going to force their head under the water. Like that was what they would visualize. Like you're going to kill these people. Like these people, like, you know, that's just how cutthroat it was. Ultimately, it ended up that wasn't a very sustainable or healthy way to go about competing.
Sure.
But
sure.
I get the idea behind it.
Yeah. I think for me too, I struggled a lot in the early goings of being a little bit too empathetic. I would have a hard time seeing somebody like wander out of the room with their head down because they just lost a significant amount of money that meant something to them. Like there was part of me that just like wanted to make it right. And there was also a part of me that felt really entitled when I lose. And I just desperately wanted somebody to come up, pat me on the back and say like, here's your buy-in back, man. You know, that was a hard thing for me to get over the first couple of years. And making it a blood sport simplified that a little bit, right? I knew that when I was on the mound and I gave up a shot, nobody was fucking there. I was on an island, right? Nobody was going to come out, pat me on the ass and say like, you did your best, man, go get the next guy. So like you're on your own. And I had to kind of like transpose that mindset into this game where money's being exchanged and more money than I'm comfortable with. I had never seen $1,000 in my life prior to becoming a poker player in college. So like to lose that amount in a pot was like unfathomable to me. And when, you know, the first couple of times it happens, it's like I was beyond reproach. So I think like getting that toughness and grittiness and resilience kind of instilled in me, where it's like, as long as we're all at this table, we agreed to the same construct and there is no hard feelings no matter what happens.
Yep. Nobody's cheating. Everybody knows the rules. Everybody knows the stakes. Everybody's in this together. That's really the best way to go about it. You know, I still
struggle tremendously with this. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I can't gamble with friends. I just can't gamble with friends. It's stupid. But, and I know that this is like some form of self-sabotage, but I punt if I'm with friends. And I don't mean necessarily poker. Like if you and I had a free throw shooting contest and I'm the better free throw shooter, I'm going to lose an unfair amount of the time. Don't
you have a bet going right now about 70-day challenge?
I'm free rolling a bunch of people. It would be impossible for me to lose this bet. Like, yeah. The 75 hard challenge, it's 2 workouts a day, no alcohol, no cheat meals, and you have to read 10 pages of nonfiction a day. You also have to upload a progress pick every day. And it's like, outside of the nonfiction and the progress pick, it's my life anyway. So like, I basically was just trying to incentivize a lot of my friends to kind of right the path a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you're not training on a regular basis, the one thing that I think is the one part of that challenge that's the toughest is just the soreness of doing 2-a-days every single day. Yeah. Like it's very, very hard for your body to recover. After like 2 weeks, you're just going to feel absolutely fucking miserable, I would imagine.
Very, very true. I'm doing a lot of recovery stuff, a lot of like sauna work, a lot of cold ice baths, things that promote and stimulate recovery.
Yeah, you have to. You have no choice. Cool. So let's talk about your favorite poker session ever. So, okay. and we actually kind of jumped over the empathetic you being extremely empathetic with your friends and losing bets to them an unfair amount of the time. I do want to touch on that because like I have problems with, here's the thing that I did that I think is stupid and that is horribly negative EV, but like I made friends with a guy who is now passed and was a billionaire. And he was the reason why bigger games at Commerce ran. Like he would come in and, the new game would run, or he would get a seat automatically, regardless of the board. It didn't matter. And him and I became very good friends just through table banter and talking, that like he stopped wanting to play pots against me and wanted to check it down. And like, because I'm me, I did that. And every time it happened, I thought, fuck, what am I doing? Like, why am I allowing this to happen? And like the alternative, I have a good friend of mine, his name is Tango. Tango, on the other hand, Max tried to do that to him like twice. And Tango was just like, Max, I'm stuck right now. I'm just playing against everybody. And like, it was totally fine. And I'm like, why the fuck didn't I just say that in the first place? Why didn't I just say like, let's play against each other? Why did I get coerced into doing this, but I don't really want to? So yeah, I feel your pain. I think I'm probably pretty similar to you.
Yeah, it's I think it's born out of social dynamics. Because like outside of the construct of the actual game where you're trying to make money and exchange dollars and things like that, particularly in live, you're also, you're building these very shallow exchanges and relationships. And if you're the type of person that, leads with a certain value system or even a certain value proposition where it's like, what you can get out of me is trust. Like, I'm a trustworthy person. The second that's like kind of like what you lean on in a game full of deceit, you're forced to prove that trustworthiness, right? And like, it's subconscious. It's just like, I something about me is like that I like being transparent, open, and trustworthy, and like you can count on me not to lie and things like that. So like when somebody kind of reaches for an olive branch, I'm very quick to just say yes. You know what I mean? Because it's like I like that. I like the fulfillment of bridging those gaps, and even if they are relatively shallow relationships, building them. But like, you're right. Now your bottom line just went to shit.
Yeah, and I mean everybody else loves it. Right? Like everybody that's sitting and playing against me is like, great. Like we don't even have to compete with him anymore. Like he's out of the running. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's, to me though, I think like poker, it is a lot of shallow relationships, but some of the most fulfilling and best relationships that I have in the world have been born from playing cards against people and just getting to know them. So like, I guess for me, like I become friends with people like maybe too quickly. I don't know exactly how that works, but yeah, I get close. I like people. And then once I like them, like, I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to harm them. And then they don't want to play hard. Then I just have gone along with it. But at some point, I do make it a point now that like, I'm not going to check down. I'm not going to slow play. Like when we're at the poker table, we're fucking at war with each other, and when we stand up, we're friends. And that's just how I have to live my life so that I can sleep at night.
Or eat.
Right. That eating helps. Winning money helps. Okay, so now tell me the story about your favorite poker session ever.
Okay. I was going to lean into like, I have a couple really memorable, huge sessions where I won over $1.5 million. I have two actually. But they don't really stand out as, I mean, they're my favorites for very, very clear and utter reasons. But they're not as memorable as like those early sessions where you just have case money on the line, and if things go sour, you're kind of just out. So I think that my favorite poker session probably would have been, and I guess this would have been like 2006 or so. And it actually got me kicked out of this game. It ended up getting me banned from the game, but I didn't really care. I mean, I did care, but like whatever. So I was playing this underground game in Pittsburgh. It was 10-20. It was the biggest I'd ever played at that point, and I probably had a 20K roll, give or take. And I think I went to the game with like 5,000, was in for all of it. So I have like 5K in front of me. I get into a very fortunate spot where I run aces into kings, and I hold, get myself up a little bit over 10,000. And the game was ran by this guy, Mike the Greek. So very wealthy, seedy guy. Who knows how he came across it? I mean, the game is literally populated by restaurant owners.
Do you ever think about like how many hitmen and like hired killers? Like
there was a retired hitman in the game, Blairsville Johnny. Blairsville Johnny was very open about the fact that he was a retired hitman. He was in his like late 60s, and he would just reminisce about the people that he killed, and like it was just no big deal to him. It was just a Tuesday.
I will never forget. Sorry, this is another tangent, but you just sparked something in me. These two guys were going at it at Commerce, and I'll never forget this because it was like late at night, and like the one guy kind of mumbled under his breath, like basically it was like, if this wasn't my hometown, you'd be fucking done. And it was like stone faced, and I was like, my blood just went cold. I was like, holy fuck! Like I believe this guy that like
for sure.
Anyway.
For sure.
So
yeah, we're playing like this 9-handed game where Mike the Greek is the runner. Again, no idea how this guy came into his millions. I'm sure it was seedy. There's a retired hitman in there. There are a few restaurant owners. There's bookies. There, everything. But there's no professional poker players. So I'm already sitting with I've basically increased my bankroll by 25%, and I'm still sitting with it. So I now have a third of my net worth on the table. This hand happens where I think I opened like pocket sixes from late-ish position, maybe like low jack. And I was in either the 7 or the 8 seat, and Mike was in the 9. And there was this other guy, Tony G. He was the sweetest man on earth. He ran a beverage company. Like he did all the beverage lines for stadiums and stuff. So very wealthy, but like couldn't play cards for shit. Just the nicest guy on earth. And he was across the table from me. So he was like either in the 2 or the 3. Anyway, this hand happens where I open sixes. Mike 3-bets me pretty large, like something obscene. I open to maybe 100. That's probably even a little big, whatever. And he makes it like 900.
Yeah.
So I call
2005, 10-20 games. Standard 9x 3-bet. Yeah, of course. We're going to peel. Like,
we're in there.
Whatever.
And it comes like 9-7-5, 2 of a suit. I check. Greek bets huge. I call. Turn is like an offsuit deuce. I check. He bets huge again. I call. River is like an offsuit jack. I check and he rips. And like this is my case money. I have third pair to the board in a 3-bet pot. And I'm like thinking for a long time, and I'm like talking to him, and this guy is just a fucking walking tell box. And I just know, man. I just know, this guy looks like he's about to die in his seat. Like he literally looks like he's going to keel over. And finally I was just like, all right, I call. And he shows Queen 8 of clubs, which was a flop gut shot flush draw that misses. And he goes, you're good. And Tony jumps up out of his chair. He's like, holy shit, that is the greatest call I've ever seen in my entire. You had to have seen his cards. And Greek is a little bit blind. And sometimes we'll peel his cards pretty high.
Yeah, but he's in the 9.
But like I'm in proximity. I'm like in the 8 or 7. And like he just keeps going on with his tale. Like meanwhile, this is the biggest pot I've ever won in my life. Right? I just won a 20K pot. I literally just doubled my bankroll. And I'm just like, shut the fuck up, Tony. Like this guy can have me killed. Blairsville Johnny's right across the table from me. I'm sure he knows the guy.
And he knows that I got 20K right here. Like we just chop up the money.
There's an armed guard at the door who's going to escort me to the car and maybe just put one in the back of my head. I don't know what the hell's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like the session weans on, like the game, Mike quits. And the big draw to Mike was that I won that pot with aces, the 10K pot, and I got back like 9,400. So like they're just taking a handful out of the pot in the rake.
Yeah.
But the big draw was that Mike put that back into play. He was always in the game. So he quits. The game breaks shortly thereafter. I go home. I get an invite, not from him obviously, but from somebody else to the game in 2 days. And I come, and they're 9-handed already. He's like, sorry, we're full, but you'll be next up. Somebody else comes, they make it 10-handed for him. Somebody else comes, they make it 11-handed for him.
Jesus Christ.
Then somebody leaves and they pull the chair. Another person leaves, they pull the chair. And I'm just realizing, like, I'm stonewalled out of this game forever.
Yeah.
So I never got to play again. RIP to Mike. He passed a few years ago. He was never really in good health. But that was definitely probably one of the most nerve-wracking / favorite memories I have as far as the single session goes.
I mean, that to me has to compare to, like, you know, not $1 million win, right? Because, like, just the differences in money. But like you said, before you started playing poker, like, you'd never seen $1,000, much less won or lost it in a pot. And back in those days, like, you know, my best day ever as an adult was like a $200 Valentine's Day at Applebee's, right? I thought I was like fucking making bank. And then I'm playing poker and winning like $700 or $800. I mean, this was significant to me. This was like, holy shit, I won $1,000 in a day. So yeah, like, fuck, that's what, like a 15K win, right?
Yeah, huge.
That's huge. I mean, you think about it.
I increased my bankroll by 75% in one session.
Yeah, that was the one you needed. Yeah, so the opposite story from your favorite memory to least favorite. Story of your least favorite session you've played.
I have a lot of these. One that really stands out, I made a vlog about in 2017, I think. We were testing. This is before Poker After Dark had relaunched, and Carrie wanted to test a couple of different formats before they made a decision on what they were going to do, because they didn't want to do sit and goes again. And so he brought this escalator format, and we tested it out in Ivy's room. And it was supposed to be, it was supposed to start at 100, 200, and end at 500, 1K. It was going to be a $200K buy-in with the option to load once for 200K. Okay. So the lineup's pretty good. It's like JRB, Roble, Carrie, Aussie Matt, Bob Bright, myself, and one other fun player that I can't recall off the top of my head. So we're playing the 100, 200 level. And obviously everybody's straddling to make it 2-4 because we're all sitting 200K deep. Yeah. So it already becomes 100, 200, 400 immediately. And I'm doing well. I'm winning out of the gate. I'm trying to like strategize because it's like it's supposed to be a 6-hour session and we're switching stakes every 90 minutes. So I'm like trying to strategize, like, you know, how much risk do I really want to take on at the 1-2 level if I'm trying to build a stack, but like at the same token, I don't want to use up my reload prior to getting to 500 1K because I think I'm a big winner in this lineup. And like, it's very important that I'm still around in the level where I can start to cash out. Mm-hmm. But none of that mattered because Aussie Matt was just being Aussie Matt and he just rocketed off his first buy-in without any hesitation. So he buys back in and I got a big chunk of it. I'm already up like, 100, 150, something like that. He buys back in. And before we even get to the official 2-4 level, he's broke again, right? So now everybody's trying to make a decision of what to do because he is steaming and he is just sitting in his chair, not quitting, obviously, like demanding to be able to buy back in. He is just beside himself, livid. He's like, you can't kick a gambler out whenever he's stuck and all. And like, we're all pandering to Carrie. We're like, hey, man, like, we want to try this format out and all, but like, maybe now's not the best time. So it becomes this exception of like, I think it was already an exception. I think that we agreed to only doing 1 200K buy-in, no reload. And then Matt went broke so fast, we're like, all right, we'll allow one. And then it became a thing of like, hey, let's let this guy get back in here. So eventually, like, we just decide we're not doing the escalator anymore and we're just going to play.
Why not just have unlimited rebuys with the escalator? Why did you want to?
I think the whole purpose is to merge it between tournament and cash. We actually just filmed one. It's the current Poker After Dark that's being released weekly right now. It was an escalator format. We started at 51 and we ended at 1-2 with a 10K buy-in. I think it's not great.
Sounds weird. Sounds weird for cash that like people are busting out.
Yeah.
I mean, why not just run a sit and go if that's the plan?
Right. And like nobody wants to play a fucking sit.
Right. So, but nobody wants Aussie Matt, who's steaming, to not be able to buy back in either. No. Right.
So needless to say, we let him buy back in. We start playing 3-6, which is mostly 3-6-12. And eventually it gets bumped up to just like straight 500 1K. Carrie's buried $1 million. Matt's down at least $1 million. I'm up $1 million. and I'm out of makeup and having like one of the best sessions of my life. And now the game gets bumped up to 1K, 2K. Bright had left, and I think Roble may have left. We're playing like 5 or 6 handed in a lineup where I just estimate that I am making all of the money. And I run kings into carries aces. I get set over set by Matt, and I run overpair versus overpair into carry again. Suddenly I'm stuck 700,000 in the game. And it was just like, this is the most gutting thing I've ever gone. Like, I went from being like 800K out of makeup to almost $1 million in. And it was just so insanely gut wrenching because you feel responsible, right? You feel like you did something wrong to go on a swing like that. But like when you put it into reasonable terms, it's like we were playing 1K, 2K with sometimes a 4K straddle. And yeah, I probably had way too much exposure on the table. And I think that's ultimately what it was. It's like for myself, I didn't care, but I felt like my backers were going to be upset because I didn't protect the win and just like get out of there. But at the same token, it's like if I got invited to a 1K, 2K game tomorrow with this lineup and you had the caveat of both Carrie and Matt being buried, wouldn't you risk $1 million or $2 million to play? It's only 10 buy-ins.
Yeah.
Five if there's a straddle. And I think like when you're able to reframe it that way to your investors, it obviously is like, hey, you did your best and you had some really unfortunate things happen. But the human side of it is just really hard to parse through because you do feel like there was some control that you could have taken along the way, be it either quitting and walking away or just like not losing the max when you get set over set 300 blinds deep,
Right. Like, like you said, it's 1K, 2K, and I'm sure you're playing very deep. You get set over set. Like, the thing is, if you just, I don't know what set you had in said situation whether it's middle or bottom or whatever, but like if it's bottom and Aussie Matt has top 2, then and you don't get his stack,
right?
You're horribly upset with yourself because you're like, what the fuck was I doing? Like, he's supposed to go broke there every time.
Yeah, especially in a spot where it's like he's just going broke with like overpairs.
Right. Too. Yeah. Like, it's unfortunate. It's unlucky, but it's poker. And ultimately, it's 3 buy-ins with this obnoxious stake that y'all are playing.
Right.
It's just massive game.
It's hard for your brain to wrap around that negative variance exists in some of the biggest money spots that you'll ever have. Right. And like that's just going to happen to everybody throughout their career. There's always going to be that one defining moment where you're like, this is the biggest money spot that I'll ever have available to me. And I just ran bad. Dahamo busted me 43rd in the main event where he turns a 2-outer on me, where I'm very likely to win most of his stack and just be chip leader. Instead, he becomes chip leader. I'm out 43rd. He wins $9 million. I win 200K. Right. It's like, it's so hard not to focus on those, but like, if you play this game, it's going to happen.
Yeah. And I would say that I would have much rather preferred you winning that WSOP looking with the knowing the things that are kind of like circulating around nowadays. But, I think for cash game players, it's a thing that doesn't happen as often as tournament players. Tournament players are insane to me. Like they're just crazy. Like I have multiple friends that are just like, I was playing a final table, like over $1 million up top and like get in all the money for like, 600K and EV and just lose my 70-30 and, they finish in 7th and somebody else wins and gets the prestige and gets a name and gets all the stuff, all the secondary benefits of like having a major title. And it's just like, holy shit, nobody even knows your name. Like nobody outside of like, who's like not immersed in poker knows your name when like the alternative is like everybody knows your name. And it's just like such a massive swing that like tournament players, I don't know how they deal with that on like any basis. Like that is just an insane amount of it's just an insane amount of insane amount of just value on the line at the end of those tournaments.
Yeah, it's very difficult because it always shakes out the same way. One person is going to get the lion's share, right? Cash doesn't necessarily have to be that way. If you're in the biggest game that you've ever played, you're playing 10x the stakes you usually play, and you're taking a massive shot, you don't have to either win or go broke, right? You could just blend in, and just recoup a little bit of whatever your win rate is, plus or minus. But yeah, for MTT guys, it's just like basically you're just building up a collection of opportunities, and then you're just letting the cards fall as they may.
Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully,
so
you cash
all
in.
right, I'm gonna put myself in a spot where I'm in a final table with 7 figures up top 10 times, and out of those 10, I'll run well at some frequency, and I'll run bad at some frequency, and hopefully it at least shakes out to somewhere around what my neutralized EV should be in those 10 collective spots. But most of the names we know just sun run in those spots. They just like win 9 out of 10, or they top 3 9 out of 10, and some of it's a byproduct of leveraging their skill, but the other half of it is just like getting insanely lucky in the moments that matter.
Yeah, running good. Like I watched the WSOP final table where like Stu Unger won maybe the first or second time, and it was like, oh, he's like gotten it in bad 3 times and just like ginned it every time. And it's like you grow up thinking like dude is like invulnerable and invincible and just like the best person that's ever walked the face of the earth. But it's like, oh yeah, he ran good to get himself those titles even back in the 80s. And like, I don't care what anybody says, over the course of a lifetime, it is very hard for variants to run even for an MTT player playing in giant events. Like
even a cash player in live events, like there just aren't enough hands. I mean, the fact of the matter is, whether you're talking about poker, business, entrepreneurship, even if you're talking about like social popularity or finding the one, or becoming a celebrity or whatever the case may be, all of these spectrums, they're all built off of survivorship bias. Everybody that we adorn as being worth something is a survivor that is heavily biased based on the amount of positive variance they took on. So it's like for every one of them, there's 100 others that didn't get the positive boost and just fell in the cracks.
Yeah, that's just life. And poker is poker is very brutal, very, very brutal in that way.
Not a meritocracy, that's for sure.
I had a Lucy, an online MTT player, came on the podcast just a few weeks ago and told me that like she once had 1,000 buy-in downswing in MTTs. And I was just like,
how did she not retire?
She did retire.
Yeah, you have to.
She got back to even. Like it took a year and a half. And
that's it?
Yeah, well, I mean, online mass multi-table grinders,
Yeah.
But I was just like, wow, like people come to me in the cash streets where it's like they're on a 15 buy-in downswing and their brain is melting down because they don't know what they're doing wrong. And like, she's like, yeah, I went on 1,000 buy-in down. I was like, I could
actually, the more I think about it, that's not that bad. Like if you're playing 109s and you go on 100K downswing, like sure.
I can't even comprehend that. 1,000 buy-in downswing. Holy shit.
Then you just rip off the Sunday Million and life is good.
Yeah, then you're good to go after that.
Jason, tell me about presence. Why did you think presence was the missing weapon in the arsenal of poker players?
So everyone's a mindset champion when they're running great, right? But when you're getting crushed day after day and you haven't booked a win in forever and the confidence just gone, and you're trying to do this thing that you read about in a book or someone told you about, being logical and being happy that the money went in good, when all you really want to do is cry and hit something at the same time, like how are you supposed to be logical in that moment? But that's the only moment when you really need it. What you need in that moment isn't mindset. You've already read all the mindset books and you already know what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to do. What you actually need in that moment is presence. Presence is the ability to connect the dots between who you want to be and how you can actually be that person when you need it most.
So let's cut to the chase, right? Like, how do you do it? How do you stay more present when you're at the poker table?
Well, you get there by first deciding that you want more, right? That you want to grow your intuition, that you want to create more flow in your life, and that you want to reach your full potential as a player and as a person. And once you get there, you can start trying out some of the exercises and practices that I've put together. If it feels good, if you're enjoying it, you can keep going, right? And if you keep going long enough, eventually you'll find that you're just playing at really high levels, that you feel good with low stress, and you're enjoying your experience a lot more. Not just at the table, but away from it as well.
I personally would love to have as much presence as I possibly can in my day-to-day life. And if you, the listener, right now wants to add some presence to your game, Visit pokerwithpresence.com, join Jason Su's email newsletter, and then schedule a free consult with the Master of Presence himself. One more time, that's pokerwithpresence.com.
Could you tell me a poker lesson you've learned from a dark teacher or a bad experience, basically?
Can I be my own?
You can, actually. You can be your own dark teacher.
I actually think that this is maybe a little bit meta. To be fair, like I just haven't had the luxury of having poker teachers. I actually said this. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, and it came up. She was telling me how her parents held her to such high standards that they would basically crack the whip as far as schoolwork went, and would teach her lessons that weren't even on the curriculum yet. Like, oh, you're reading at a third grade level. Here's a book meant for a sixth grader. Like, you're gonna learn, kind of thing. And she was like telling me about the process, homework and stuff like that. And it dawned on me. I was like, I've never had someone in my life help me with homework. Like, never, ever. I was just responsible from day one, right? From first grade on, it was just one of those things where it was like, this is my world. And whether I sink or swim is totally up to me. Nobody's going to be there to pick me up. And I feel like...
Do you think it had anything to do with like being a smart kid and being capable and like able to take care of yourself?
Well, the irony is that she's probably more intelligent than I am. But yes, for sure.
I mean, as a kid, like your mom, your dad.
Yeah, it was also just a byproduct of like need, right? Like I just didn't have adults in my life that could facilitate that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. If I wasn't somewhat above average in those realms, I would have just sunk, right? I'm not trying to imply that everybody has sink or swim moments and they swim because of resiliency or stick-to-itiveness or anything like that. It's like, no, if I was below average intelligence and I was stuck in that, I would have failed, period. There's no overcoming that.
I just kind of I see like myself, I never had help with homework either, really. Like I was just basically effectively looking back on it now, I raised myself.
Yep.
And I think the major reason was because I was pretty self-sustainable from an early age. Like I didn't get in trouble. I made okay, passable grades. And because I just was pretty self-sustainable, it was like, okay, my mom's like, you're good. We don't have to worry about you. We're going to do our other stuff. And then like, it wasn't until later on that I realized like, fuck, man, I wish I would have been pushed. I wish that I would have had somebody holding me to the fire to gain responsibility. And so that I wouldn't have been this like 20-year-old idiot that knew nothing about the real world at all and basically made a shit ton of mistakes and had to figure life out on my own. But,
yeah, I feel the opposite. I feel very thankful for it. Just like hearing her recount her experience, like you could tell that there's some animosity and resentment there.
That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah. And also it's just like, I think it pushes you out of some, not self-reliance necessarily, but like it pushes you away from embracing what you're best at, right? So like she's a massive intellect, but like it becomes difficult to embrace your intelligent side whenever there's such a hyper focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just kind of free to do as I wished, which was nice because I may have been naturally intelligent, but I wasn't naturally gifted when it came to athletics. And I poured my heart and soul into it, right? Which is what leads me to now the dark teacher. Because I poured my heart and soul into something that wasn't a natural talent of mine, obviously the positive feedback loop was seeing the massive improvements, right? The gains and being able to achieve maybe beyond my own personal ceiling or what I thought my estimated ceiling was. Coming out of high school, I was determined to play college baseball. And all of my coaches told me, like, you may be able to walk on as a first baseman, but like you have no shot at pitching. And by the time I got to college, it was just very abundantly clear that like not only was I going to play, but I was going to pitch. And a lot of that was just a byproduct of kind of a fuck you mentality of like I see it another way. But also it was just a byproduct of like putting in the work and being disciplined enough to go after it. But because that was where my mind was, and because all of my validation was coming from the positive feedback loops, when the negative feedback loops happened, the rug would pulled out from underneath me. So in college, I had a coach who was hardly supportive, right? Quite the opposite. He was hypercritical. He was very pedantic about his criticisms. You know, like he was the kind of guy that when you were on the mound in a 1-2 pitch or in a 1-2 count, if you missed your spot, you just hear, come on, right? And like there was no forgiveness for walking somebody. There was you just couldn't really operate within the lines of playing the cat and mouse game with the hitter, right? It was very much a brute force mentality of like, we're going to make him beat us on our best pitch. And your sole job out there is just to control that pitch and throw strikes. And it's like, you know, there's some validity to that, but like it's level one thinking, right? Like there's way more going on between a pitcher and a hitter that I can't just say like, all right, man, I'm going to pipe it down the middle all day long. And you guys are just going to tee off on me. And hopefully my fielders are going to back me up because, you know, you're only supposed to hit 350, which means 65% of the time you're out. And that's a win for me kind of thing. It's like, no, we got to get better. We want them to hit 200 off of us, right? That's how success is built. No shock. We were fucking terrible. We didn't win, right? Yeah. We won 4 games my sophomore year. Like, shocker that nobody's playing well for a guy like this. But it really forced me into a level of self-actualization that I probably wasn't ready for at 19, but I couldn't be more thankful for. So it weighed on me badly. Going into the sophomore year, I was projected as like being a top. Well, I was projected as being a conference pitcher. Let's not rank it 1 through 4, but I was going to be one of the starting 4 in the rotation, and I busted my ass to get there. I'd been cut my freshman year from my first school. Now suddenly I'm getting like votes for captaincy, and I'm projected to be a starter and everything else. And with every single piece of like, it wasn't even negative feedback or criticism, right? It was just like essentially almost making fun of me. That wasn't what was taking place, but it was literally just like disapproval of whatever action I took. With every one of those that piled up, I performed worse and worse and worse and worse. And like, I just couldn't overcome that lack of validation, right? I needed support. I needed somebody to pat me on the ass. It's like when you come from that background of like, you don't have anybody to lean on, and you finally find yourself in a vulnerable place where you can't necessarily rely solely on yourself because you're not that talented, right? You need that support system. I didn't have it. And fortunately, I wanted this bad enough that I swallowed my pride and I went and saw a sports psychologist that somehow we had on campus for free.
That's pretty nice.
It was amazing. It was absolutely game changing. It took me over half the season to do it, and I think at that point I was like 1-4. I finished the season like 3-6 maybe, but the following year I think I went on to have like a 5-1 record or something along those lines. Like it was just such a massive snowball effect where it was very clear that I was letting outside forces be kind of like a negative teacher, if you will. It was teaching me to lean into the negative validation.
Lead into the negative validation. That's
brain validation, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of science now in today's day and age of positive reinforcement dramatically outperforming negative reinforcement over and over and over again. But I think that like it's so weird how far the world has come in just our lifetimes where like, you know, you said you never had like a poker coach or poker teacher. Like I had friends that played poker, but like there was nowhere to go. How do you hire a poker coach? What about like a mental game coach? What the hell is that? Like you just deal with your own shit. Like don't be a baby, pull yourself up. You lost half your net worth. Like move on. Buy in the next day. Like it's just, we didn't have those resources.
Right. And I think if it wasn't for that experience, I would have never made it. I think that something would have happened that would have hurt my feelings, that would have made me feel less than, that would have invalidated me somewhere along my poker path.
Yeah.
You know, one of the 5 or 6 times that I went poker broke, it would have been enough to just like cripple me. But instead, I already had this system built in place because I'd experienced once in baseball. So it's like in this instance, poker now is that coach saying you're not good enough, you're not performing well enough, you can't do this, your ceiling is too low, yada, yada, yada. And like, you know, it became a lot easier to take a step back and say like, let's look at this logically. How much of this is variance? How much of this is me overextending myself? Where can I take control and actually get better and things like that? And, you know, it made the self-actualization process in my mid-20s whenever I was suffering financial swings and trying to figure out what the fuck I was going to do with the rest of my life, a lot easier and a lot more calming because I already had a template in place where it was like, okay, I know where to start. I know that I feel invalidated by this thing that I'm pursuing, and that's on me.
That is so big. Yeah, that is, I mean, that's a greatness bomb, right? Like most people, including myself, especially when I was, 21 through 25 years old, your identity gets wrapped up in playing poker and being a poker player and being successful, right? Because you tell people, you reinforce it. I am a professional poker player. This is what I have done year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And when poker shits on your head, like it always inevitably does, you start losing your sense of place in the world. You start losing your identity. And it's really, really difficult to overcome that lost sense of self. And so I can't imagine just how well that lesson served you throughout your poker career.
Yeah, completely invaluable. And I think that it's one that, you're saying like how cyclical things are. Now all of a sudden everybody has a coach for everything, and positive reinforcement clearly outperforms negative and stuff. You have to strike that balance, right? You have to be self-sustaining and be able to self-rely to some degree rather than just leaning on 100 different coaches. And you have to be able to absorb negative critiques and invalidation feelings and things like that rather than just solely getting positive pats on the back and participation trophies. We haven't figured that out yet. We're just stuck in the constant pendulum swing where it's like, this is clearly not working despite the fact that we've tried it for a while. So let's swing way to the other pole and try that. And it seems like we just, as a species or a race, we very rarely find the middle ground and just, outshine. But that's also why, like, there are 1%ers because they figured the fuck out.
Yeah. Fedor Holtz, right? Like there are people that are just, that are just next level. And it's hard. I think that like being an emotional creature and being impacted by these things on an emotional level, I think that has just a major impact as it relates to, the feedback, whether it be positive or negative, how you internalize it, how you use it. Do you use the negative feedback as fuel to surge forward? Do you get complacent because of too much positive feedback? It's tough. Like you said, it's really tough striking that balance. And it's a thing that I think about a lot as a poker coach is like, whenever my guys sit in a session, my job is to figure out what they did wrong. However, my job is not to only focus on everything they did wrong so that I totally destroy their sense of confidence and self-worth so that they start performing at a lower level the next time. So it's like, you can't just destroy them for the things they do wrong. You also have to talk about the things they do right and the things they do well and the good decisions that they make. It's just about building, a resilient human being and not just totally breaking them, because humans are breakable. Their confidence can be broken and then they can perform at a much lower level than they ever have before when that happens.
We drastically underestimate the impact of one single person, like either on someone else or in our own particular lives. Like, if I've learned anything about communication, it's just like it's all about the messaging. So it's all about how you package it, and it's all about how cognizant you are to how much weight your message carries, right? So you can't just speak flippantly to somebody who is hanging on your every word and taking it all at face value, right? You can't just like be very short and just be like, that sucks, you're terrible, right? Because they hear that and it cements in their brain. And conversely, like it's not worth your time, effort, or energy to put out a very deep, elaborate, nuanced piece of feedback to somebody who doesn't respect you or give a shit about what you have to say. And social media is like the iconic platform to demonstrate this. Twitter specifically, right? It's like it's such a lose-lose. So like my audience in particular is probably split 50-50 between people who follow me to hate me and follow me because they respect me in some higher level or think that I have something to offer. And it doesn't matter which of those messages I choose, right? I could choose something deeply nuanced that I think holds a lot of value, and some fraction of my audience is going to see that, and then the rest of it is just going to dunk all over it and say like you're a pseudo intellectual and you're phony and all this other stuff. On the other hand, I can kind of like be the guy that I was growing up in a poor rural town surrounded by people who are not well to do and not super intelligent and everything else, and I kind of bro out a little bit like I did throughout all my athletic years. And that same group that liked the first message is just going to call me immature, childish, and tell me to grow up and be more mindful of the message that I'm putting out there, while the flock of trolls and everybody else who's enjoying the platform for the lulls is going to be like, I didn't even know you were funny. And it's just like, you can't win for losing, so all you can be is authentic, but on a more personal level, we all have a hierarchy of where our circle ranks, and there are people within it that we just hold in much, much, much higher regard. And if they're unaware of that, their messaging can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually, I don't know that I've talked about this publicly. I hope I haven't. If so, the podcast listeners will just have to listen to this story again. But I was trading coaching sessions with people because I like learning how other people teach and how other people coach. And I think there's a lot of value in just trading sessions with other high-level coaches. And they come to poker from a much more theoretical base, where it's heavy theory, heavy PIO, all of that sort of thing. Lots of solves, lots of GTO concepts. And we were breaking down a hand that I had played that I played pretty well, actually. It was like, basically, it was zone poker, 500, no limit on ignition. I open the button with 8-9 suited. The big blind 3-bets me. I call. The flop's 10-7 deuce. The big blind bets. They make a large bet. I decide to call because I feel like I have a pure calling range there. I'm not raising like any sets or any two pair. So basically just pure calling. And then the turn was like a tray of diamonds. I had 8-9 of diamonds. So I had open ender and a flush draw. And I remember saying, like in my plan, explained that if they bet, I'm shoving. And then they checked. And I was very much expecting a bet. Like I was expecting them to range bet the flop and then follow up on the turn on like 10-7 deuce tray. Mm-hmm. And they checked, and I was kind of thrown for a loop. Like I only had 15 seconds to react. I end up checking back because I talked a lot about on the video that like I didn't want to get check raised all in. I felt like he was going to barrel here a lot, and when he checks, I felt like he could be trying to get the last bet in, which I didn't want to happen. So I check back, and then the river's an ace, and he leads small, so maybe like 23% of the pot. And I basically was just like, yeah, ace is the most overbluff card in the deck. Like he's basically obligated to bet here. So I'm just going to raise, and I raised and he folded. So pretty simple hand. And so in our coaching session, we break down the hand, and like I verbalized my thought process. I talked about all the things I was thinking about. And then like he showed his way, right? Which was like heavy in theory, which basically came to most of the same conclusions that I came to, just logicking my way through the hand. But like the specificity that he had for each of the reasons, I was like, it kind of blew me away. I was like, wow, like that is a level of detail that like my thought process was lacking. And it kind of made me fall apart. Like, even though we both came to the same conclusion, I came to it from a very different way, which I think makes sense considering how I'm constructed just as a human being. But yeah, it shattered my confidence for about a month. It was like, wow, like the game's progressing and evolving, and people are just, I've fallen behind. I haven't been studying. I haven't been investing my energy into learning, like having the theory just down pat. And then maybe a few months after that, like there was a hand that went down, and I can't even remember the hand, but basically like I suggested like calling the flop and leading the turn because intuitively it felt good, which is like a funny thing to say, but like intuitively it felt like that was going to capture a lot of EV. And the same coach was like breaking the hand down, and I told him like, man, have you ran the solve for leading the turn? And it was just like outright dismissed, right? It was like, no, like that's not a thing. And I just kept thinking about it. And like after the call, I was like, hey man, can you run this, like show it to me, show me the result. And so he runs it, and it turns out that it was a good exploit that was like pretty cool to find, just from like thinking about the hand. And what I realized at that moment was like, Brad, you're fucking good at this game. Like, what are you doing? Like you just approach it in different ways than other people. And that's okay, right? Like, it's okay to not approach it in the same way. And like, once I kind of like suggested my idea, it got shot down instantly. And then I made them run the solve for the spot. And he was like, holy shit, you might actually be onto something here. I realized like, okay, like you're good. You can put yourself back together. There's more than one way to skin a cat. But
I go through that a lot. Like maybe every 6 months or so, especially being surrounded by a lot of young talent now with like Landon. And it's a very good, healthy thing because he's not the type of person who will just like look up to me so much that he takes everything I say with a grain of salt. We're all holding each other like accountable to kind of show your work. And that's something that's a little bit newer in maybe the last 5 years in poker because we have a methodology to do so now. I go through a lot of similar experiences where I maybe am like playing and thinking about a spot even very correctly, but I'm not thinking about it nearly as detailed. And it's kind of like, or maybe even a better example is like I'll mess up a sizing in the sense that like the sizing I choose is a low frequency play and it's fine. It's literally fine. The candidate you chose is fine. The sizing is fine. All of it's fine. But the problem is I'm not doing it at a low frequency, right? So it's like I'm not adhering to the more preferred size in that spot, and it will just like shatter me for a second. Where it's just like I don't understand because intuitively everything that allowed me to arrive at this makes sense. It's also being demonstrated that it's fine at equilibrium. Where is all this getting convoluted? And what's really bothersome is, or what makes me feel less than, I guess, is that I'm doing this from a brain solve effectively, right? Like I'm working through heuristics that I know are valued in game theory. I'm working through my knowledge of math and the constructs of poker and everything else, and I'm natively coming up with pretty good responses. They're looking at piles of fucking data, and that rocks me to my core because it's like we're only going to acquire more and more and more data, right? So like the essence of the game is kind of shifting, and it's not in a direction that like I enjoy. It was once an art, now it's turning into a science. And it's not that I'm not scientific. It's not that I don't enjoy the science. It's that I like the pioneer aspect of discovering new nodes and being the first to implement something that's like a little bit out there, right? So I think your example is incredibly good because it's just a demonstration of macro versus micro thinking, right? And in a lot of ways, it's a demonstration between how you logic through spots in live versus like how you execute online. And I think that we both need one another. In a lot of ways, the macro thinkers are going to be the ones who discover new theory, who discover like new elements to strategy, right? In a big way, they're going to be the ones that evolve it big picture wise. But it's the data analysts, it's the micro analysis, it's the executioners that are going to be the ones who make it a thing and print all the EV in a large way from it. I say basically, like I say this all the time, that the community is built of two camps: game theorists and practical executioners, right? And they're not the same, right? It's just like in the world of science, right? You have the scientists who are out there hypothesizing, and then you have the guys running the trials. You have the people who are in the thick of it all that are analyzing the data, and they don't really cross paths all that often, right? They just exchange results between one another, or a little bit of information between one another, and come to conclusions.
Yeah, I think in that hand, like that was another question of like when I raised the river, it was like we talked about sizing and precision of sizing. And it was like, he's like, why did you choose this size? And my only response was because that's the size I would choose when I had value. Like that was like, I bluffed with the same size that I would choose when I have value. And like, then it was like, is there a more efficient size? And, I just think of like, it's kind of like growing up, I think that poker is, you and I are kind of like in this childhood state of like, it's magic and like, it's so complex and big. We love discovering new things and like being innovative. And like, now it's just shrinking. And it's like, when you're a kid, you can be anything in the world. And then you realize when you get older that you can't, and the possibilities are much more limited than you once thought. It kind of removes the magic of the situation. I think that's probably what you and I, are probably dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I also think that, like, in the same realm, that doesn't disqualify us in any way, shape, or form. Just
Hell
like when you
no.
turn 21
Yeah.
and you realize you have to fucking be an adult. Like, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, yeah, okay, so like I'm not going to be the one credited for big bet sizes or limping or like any of these things, but like you're gonna make a lot of money in this game still.
Yeah.
You have an 18-year head start.
Personally, I'm at peace with being a practical executioner. I think that's what makes me feel comfortable just as a poker player. Like, you put me in there, I'm going to execute, I'm going to logic my way through spots, and maybe I won't find the most efficient line, but I'm going to find a damn good line. Like, I'm going to find a great line, maybe not the perfect one. Oh man, I don't even know how long we've been going because we went an hour before the podcast, and I don't even know when the podcast actually started. But
Look, I totally get it. You feel like being a lone wolf in your poker journey has hamstrung your ability to realize your full potential. So I'm about to give you a golden opportunity to plug into a supportive tribe that will be the poker family you've always wished you had. How much money would you give for 1 hour of interactive group coaching led by myself, Coach Thomas, and occasionally past guests of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast? For now, and this will absolutely change at some point in the near future, the price of admission to the live Poker Power Hour is 100% free. All you've got to do to get your invite is head to chasingpokergreatness.com and hop on the VIP newsletter. No more excuses, no more procrastination. It's time to take action and put yourself in position to turn your poker dreams into reality. I hope to see that beautiful face of yours in just a couple of days.
Okay, we'll go to like the more lightning round. We'll wrap it up since my throat's hurting and I don't know how long I've been talking. What's a purchase you've made in the last year that's been ultra impactful to your poker game?
Shockingly, I just didn't buy anything during the pandemic. Like, I just went into hoarding mode. Bitcoin, I guess. I mean, that's actually probably true. Like, I bought a bunch of Bitcoin at the end of 2020 at like 15, and now it's like 50. So I have the availability to play bigger.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to sell for 100, 200 anymore, or 200, 400 even.
I remember when Detox Crew came and Bitcoin had splattered to around 3,500, I believe, at the beginning of the pandemic. And like, there was a big discussion about Bitcoin, and like all the talk was that it was going much, much lower from there. And that wasn't the case. That was the stone bottom, I believe. Like, it powered up the next few days, like 45 or 5K, and then just went on like this unstoppable run over the past. Actually, the run has only been like the past 4 or 5 months, right?
Yeah, maybe even less. I think I bought most recently on New Year's Eve at like 20K. So yeah, like what, 2.5 months? It's more than doubled.
Yeah. Do you ever just go to sleep at night? You wake up and you're like, that was a good sleep cycle that I used there, because Bitcoin just went up 5% overnight.
6 figures in my sleep. Like,
yeah, that's pretty good. What's a poker related thing that other people rave about that hasn't worked for you?
Yo. I think PO is an incredibly useful tool, but I think it is very barbaric in what we're capable of with solvers. I think the next iterations that we're seeing on the precipice of being launched, like GTO check, are 1,000x more powerful.
What is GTO check?
So it's, Finding Equilibrium.
I know they have a YouTube channel. Yeah.
He partnered with the Simple Suite, so like Simple Preflop, Simple Postflop, and they are releasing a new solver called GTO check. And basically what it is it does a lot of meta analysis. So all those heuristics that we were kind of talking about that we utilize in our logical thinking, the solver can actually display visually, right? So it will display like blocking power. It will display, they have this qualifier called EV regret, which I think is genius, basically what it does is it compares, in essence, the likelihood of, I don't want to say mistake propensity because that's not really what solvers calculate, but more so just like what the probability is of you losing EV on a future decision if you take the highest EV decision right now.
Okay.
Right. Or maybe not even the highest EV decision, but basically like, let's say two decisions are pretty close in EV and you choose B. What's the likelihood of you losing EV on a future street by choosing B instead of A? So it's kind of that thing. So like, say you decide to just like pure call your top set in a spot where like it's supposed to raise like 25% of the time. How much EV regret is there in pure calling versus actually mixing in this spot? And I think that that's like a really profound practical utilization of the solving tool, because at the end of the day, we've gone through this ebb and flow where we're not data analysis by trade in this community. So we don't necessarily know what the fuck we're looking at, and we're trying to parse through it and figure it all out in real time. And we went through this ebb and flow where it was like, okay, this will demonstrate to us, going back to like 2015, it's like, okay, this will show us what line to take. And we just do it, right? We just mimic it. And then it became like, oh, well, everything's a mix. So like we have to start randomizing and doing all these things to mix our lines and ensure that we're protected and balanced, yada, yada, yada. And now we're rising back up to nobody knows anything. And it's impossible for them to exploit you because they're not taking proper counters at the fact that like you're implementing a pure strategy, right? So like if you're just bucketing according to the incentives of your hand and you're saying like, well, middle set unblocks top pair, so I'm going to be more aggressive with middle set and more passive with top set. And if you just allocate that way practically, you're no longer mixing now what you do with your top and your middle sets, and you're giving up very little. And like that's what EV regret basically demonstrates, is practical range splitting as opposed to mixed range splitting. Being able to measure that is just like, at the end of the day, an absolute fucking game changer, especially due to the applications for live.
Yeah, that is pretty huge. It's crazy how, like, Pio didn't get me, I guess, in the same way that it got a bunch of people. But I think that here's the thing, like, just the whole Pio model, right? Like, I did an experiment, and I've talked about this a couple times on the pod, but basically what I did was I never raised preflop. Okay. Like, stick with me. Like I decided I'm going to explore my curiosity, playing 200 no limit. I'm never going to raise. I'm never going to 3-bet. I'm going to call everything preflop, right? Because in my sick mind, I thought, well, if I play the same ranges and I never 3-bet, like I don't have a limp raise range, I don't have a raising range, like I kind of have all the overpairs and like all the sets and all the straights. And I was like, how is this going to work post flop? Right. So basically I tried it out. Like I Googled it actually to see if like anybody had ever tried it before I did it. And there was just like 1 2+2 thread where, somebody suggested not the extreme version that I did, but a similar, like only pure limping strategy from Under the Gun playing live or something. And like, it was just pages of everyone shitting on them and telling them they're an idiot and they're stupid. And what I realized was, I did it for 3,000 or 4,000 hands. I won money at the end of the day. There's some obvious flaws in the strategy that, could be upgraded. But what I learned was that all we're doing as poker players, when you have a preflop strategy, it's just a model that you use and you believe to be better than the model of your opponents. And when I would limp, I realized they did not have a great model for playing against a good player that limps.
Right.
And their model just automatically fucking broke.
Yeah, I did this for a decade in tournaments.
Yeah, it just broke their model straight away. They didn't know what to do.
Limped. Yeah, I would solely limp, and I would find myself in spots where like people would be jamming too lightly and then getting reshoved on by a real hand, and now I have aces. And it's just like I got to win an extra entire stack because if I had just opened, that reshover would have folded and I would have only stacked the. Yeah, it's just like what we should have never garnered from a tool like PO is that the game is more limiting, right? So like reducing strategic options based on data is nonsensical. The opposite. This tool now has the ability to demonstrate alternative strategies to us where the EV gain or loss is minimal at equilibrium. But in practice, the EV gain or loss is massive, right?
It's
Due
huge.
to what you're saying. If they don't have a model to combat against a limp and they just start to make wild assumptions, like you would limp raise aces and you don't, or you would open your good hands and you're limping too wide, or whatever the case may be, whatever assumptions they plug into their model, already monkey wrench every single node on the game tree from that point forward if there's inaccuracy.
Right,
And there's
exactly.
just going to be inaccuracy.
The inputs are wrong from the get-go, and so that just destroys everything moving forward. What was interesting was like I realized like if I raise under the gun playing 6 max, like middle position is not supposed to, or the cutoff is not supposed to have a flatting range, right? It's like pure 3-bet or fold. The button has a flatting range. But anyway, so the cutoff would never call if I open under the gun. It's either 3-bet or fold. And yet I found myself limping with the same exact range and the cutoff ISOing, putting in like 6 big blinds against the same range with a much weaker hand. And I just started realizing like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like it's a very hard strategy to execute because there's like a lot of donking, a lot of weird stuff that you need to do. But I just realized like, oh, they would never put in 6 big blinds with king 10 off if I would have opened under the gun. And yet I'm limping and they are, and our ranges, my range is exactly the same, but they're putting in more money with weaker hands. Right. I just think that ultimately, like, it makes, going back to what we were saying, like there are more frontiers to look into. There are more areas of curiosity that we can explore. That I just think poker's such a fun, fascinating, cool game, and it's humans who just want to pigeonhole it into like only do X, Y, or Z in this spot every single time, and
it'll never end, right? Because you're right. The trend now is that everybody plays the same pre-flop range, right? Like cutoffs don't flat. They 3-bet X%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not actually what the game tree looks like. That's what the truncated tree looks like for a simplification model. Humans who don't know any better, right? The next wave will be the people who are courageous enough to say, fuck your pre-flop charts and start having a flatting range from every position. Because at equilibrium, it's a fucking mix. Period. We just simplified it. We just said like, oh, I'm not going to complicate my pre-flop strategy by having both a 3-bet and a calling range from the cutoff when EV loss of playing pure 3-bet is minimal, right? But the more complex of a strategy you're willing to implement, the more EV gain there is by the time you arrive at river. So the player who is implementing a 3-bet and a flat strategy from the cut is simply just going to have a greater path to winning their unfair share of EV by the end. Now, they also have a greater path to losing their unfair share of EV because there's more mistakes that they can potentially make by implementing a complex strategy. But if we were inputting an AI bot there, of course it'd have a fucking flatting range. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's able to iterate.
It just executes.
It's able to iterate 1,000,000 times deeper into the game tree than we are with our brain, and it will just simply execute because there's no fucking emotion.
I say this as somebody that has a course called Preflop Bootcamp that teaches a simplified optimal strategy. So I just want to put that out there that like, sure. I think that there is a place to start. And like, until you kind of know the rules and know what's going on, that is what gives you the latitude to kind of break the rules and explore your curiosity. But you got to start somewhere, right? So anyway, that was just an interesting thing that like I've done in the past year that I thought was pretty cool. And there's a lot of lessons there that if I had more time and wasn't, running a business, I would love to explore, but unfortunately I don't have more time. I have much less time. Speaking of that very thing, what are some things you wish you said no to more often?
Man, I don't say no to anything. And that's a problem. There are probably 20 podcasts I wish I didn't do just because actually I'm overstating that. I enjoyed most of the podcasts I did, but there was definitely a handful where it was like, what the fuck are you doing? 500 people are going to watch that. And it was a terrible interview.
Yeah.
There's a lot of content we've done for like our YouTube page that I wish I would have just said no to because like it's so time consuming. Yeah. I mean, most of it, almost all of it actually is centered around solve for why. I just think it's the nature of trying to grow your baby. It's hard to say no whenever you're in a space that you're trying to expand. And you think that there's any sort of leveraging opportunity or whatever. But yeah, I think the vast majority of the yeses I would take back are just being way too free with my time in this industry.
Yeah, time is a commodity. And speaking of like podcasts, I think we've been talking for like 3 hours here, right? Like we've been on the podcast for a while, and it's tough. Like you want exposure, you want to grow your brand, you want to do all of these things, but your resources are finite and there's a limited amount of hours in the day. And I think that, like, for me, I would love to just create content with the same regular people, like on a regular basis, that I know is like compelling, interesting, great to share. The listener learns a ton. With all of that said, like, what's the opposite? What are some things you wish you had said yes to more often? But you just said you never say no to anything, so maybe there's nothing there.
Well, no, I do. I say no to too many social things, for sure. I have this like masochistic mindset where self-sacrifice is somehow like cherished. And yeah, I mean, I just learned to snowboard last week at 39, and I've probably had 25 opportunities to learn throughout the last 20 years. And it's like, I had so much fun. I can't wait to do it again. I can't believe I said no as many times as I did. So yeah, almost all of it probably revolves around just like social things, where it's like, I wish I would have taken more trips. I wish I would have said yes to more uncomfortable experiences that, it's just getting over the hump of a little bit of fear or trepidation or whatever the case may be.
What's going to happen in Solve for Why if you're gone for 3 days? Like,
no, that's the problem. And that's what you convince yourself of, right?
Mm-hmm.
You convince yourself that you're so fucking important to the project that if you just disappear for a small period of time, the whole thing crumbles beneath you. And sometimes that's true, but very rarely is that always the case.
If you're running a decent business, that shouldn't be the case. Like, right. I hope that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
It might be the case for me, but that's a whole other can of worms. But it's just easy. I guess it's low hanging, easy fruit to just, when you're running a business, like, I'm going to work 16 hours a day or 14 hours a day every single day. Like, my off day is working 7 hours, just doing menial shit that I just couldn't bring myself to do on the other days that I was working 12 hours,
Find nobility in that, right? You create this sense of self-worth where it's like, nobody's doing this and I am. And for that reason, like, I'm noble and great, deserve a pat on the ass, where, everybody else should be like looked down on for not doing the same time.
I think that I'm an idiot mostly. As I outsource more and more things, I'm like, I could have just outsourced this the whole time. What the fuck was I thinking? Like, why do I think that, like, I need to do X, Y, or Z when there's a perfectly good human being that's overqualified to do the same exact thing? Right. And like, it's just an undervaluing of my time, I think, and probably your own time as well, where it's like,
I think some of it's actually control too, where it's
for sure it's control.
Yeah, you would rather have it 100% your way instead of 80% someone else's. Like, if they can do it to 80% your competency, that's more than enough reason to just say take it, right? But that extra 20% feels like it's worth way more than it is.
Yeah, it's a control thing. Like you said, like, my first 20 podcast episodes, I sent on my producer, he edited them, sent them back to me, and then I would re-edit every single one of them to my satisfaction. And then at some point I just stopped. But yeah, it's sometimes you just got to let go. You just got to let go of things and do the best that you can, and realize that, like, that's actually a more preferred, higher EV, more fulfillment, happier life path.
Yeah, I mean, like, when you step back 5-10 years down the line, you're not going to look back and be like, God damn it, I'm glad I created all the thumbnails for my YouTube page year one.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, they suck too, and you could have just outsourced.
Yeah, they're awful, and somebody else could have done it, and you could have spent time doing other things, like, building your business, actually. All right, couple more questions. Have you ever strongly believed something about poker only to reverse course later on? And if so, what led to that change?
I mean, the answer is obviously yes. It's just a matter of if I can pinpoint exactly what it was. I think we all go through these cycles. You kind of have to, because strategy just evolves so much now and so rapidly. I think maybe, well, I know for a fact that there was a point early in my career where I was either so arrogant or was actually so much better than the people I was playing against that I can remember uttering, like, I don't even think position matters. And the games I was playing, that probably was true to some degree. It's like, well, they're playing 7% of hands, so it really doesn't matter what fucking position we're in. But obviously, like, that's simply not the case. And the more competent people become, the more critical position actually is. Yeah, I don't know.
I was going to say even bad players. Like, I've been pouring through mass data looking at Fish and their loss rate facing C-bets in position and out of position. And it like halves when they're in position compared to being out of position. And this is like a recreational player who's like not good at poker. And like they're losing half as much when they're in position in the same exact spot as when they're out of position. So like, it just struck me as funny that like position is like just the everything in this game. Like it's just everything.
Yeah, I think I don't know that my stance has really changed on this so much, but I think that it's probably shifted a bit. But two things that I think have definitely at least evolved in my thinking is, number one, that preflop doesn't matter. I still think that that's true to some degree, in the sense that, like, I don't think you gain very much by being insanely dialed in to pre. Like, oh, bro, you're opening 23.4% from the cutoff. Like, come on, man, it's only 22.8. You know, like, I don't think those extra candidates, one or two that you're adding there, are affecting your win rate all that much, especially if you're competent post. Now, obviously, the worse you are post flop, the more important pre is. But if we're talking about like high level strat, I don't think pre is hyper important. But I think it's more important than I used to give it credit for. And then secondarily, that small betting is stupid. I've definitely come around. I see, and you know what? It's me getting a taste of my own medicine, right? Like, for everybody who's ever dismissed some sort of out there concept that I had, like limping exclusively in MTTs when sub 30 blinds, or playing big bet strategies on flops, or even pre-flop, whatever. A lot of those concepts are coming to fruition now. Like, I've ranges right now that will show you what your limp strategy should be from 30 blinds down in MTT. And there are plenty of aggregate reports that we can sort that will heavily favor a 75% C-bet size over 25%. But for me to dismiss that 25% is a thing is, kind of just me being as much of a contradiction as the same people who are saying my comparable strategy is bad.
Absolutely. And what's funny is I think it's kind of going the other way now. Like, I've poured over 35 million hands these past couple of weeks. And in many, many instances, I've just find over and over again that big bets in position outperform small bets by not an insignificant margin. And it's just hilarious to me. It's like everybody says C-bet range 30% when I'm looking at the data and the data is telling me something totally different, that people are performing way worse facing larger sizing. It's like, oh, like it's interesting looking at the data and comparing it to like the conventional wisdom of poker players and realizing like there's a big difference here. There's a big canyon in the middle between like what's actually true and what like is the agreed upon, quote unquote truth of, Twitter poker.
Well, I think the big issue is that when a lot of these strategies evolve, it's all strategy is predicated upon counter strategy, right? Like, your EV is being determined by what your opponent's reaction is. And I think when a lot of these strategies become popular, it's based upon an undiagnosed exploit in the pool. So when small betting for range became a simplification, it was because people didn't know how to properly respond. MDF wasn't really common knowledge, and people were just massively overfolding for any bet size. Mm-hmm. So when that stopped being true, when counter strategies because that's what happens, right? A popular trend is now we see bet range for 30 or 25 or whatever. Now, what's the next emphasis? Well, it's not continuing down the path of what you do when you are the aggressor. It's what do you do when you're defending against a range bet of 30? And people are just getting much better at check raising, at calling, at continuing at the proper frequencies. Well, when that becomes the case, Now we have to complicate our c-bet strategy, right? Now we have to start to implement some checking. If we're going to implement some checking with some small bets, that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yep.
Right? So we have to split our bet sizes. So either we're going to have a big bet and a small bet, or we're going to have a big bet and a check. And that's only the next iteration. The iteration after that is we're going to have a spectrum of bet sizes in accordance with checking. And we're going to have to figure out, the best and most practical way to implement 3 sizes on a flop now.
Yeah, then your computer blows up because the complexity has just gone to the stratosphere.
Right. Or bomb pots become more popular because solving them is literally impossible.
Yeah, it's the MDA that I've been doing has been against recreational players specifically because their strategies don't really evolve. Right. They still do the same kind of bad things that they've always done just because of human beings and how we're constructed. Actually, I don't like the term recreational player. This is just like a totally silly tangent that I'm going on because I think it's imprecise. And I don't like the term fish or whale because I think there's negative connotations. Actually, the term fish and whale, I don't really mind. I think it just is what it is. I think it's more precise than recreational player, to be honest with you, because I've met Recs that are better than me and play higher stakes than me, but they just have a career and a job. Yeah. So
that's going to be common moving forward. I think the ceiling of what a poker career is now is so much lower than what it was 10 years ago or even 20 years ago that, most professionals are going to have a side gig.
Right. And this isn't, dude's got a PhD. It's not even, poker is just his labor of love, right? He's just really fucking great at it. And so to me, the fish, the whales,
imagine somebody calling you
Recs,
a recreational entrepreneur.
Yeah. It's
because
just silly.
You have a business on the side.
Right. It
doesn't make sense.
To me, the term that I've been using that I hope catches on is instinctual. Just an instinctual poker player that sits down and they play poker based on how they feel, how their emotions feel in the moment, and they just make decisions by clicking buttons kind of randomly, which to me makes a lot of sense because around the world, fish in Brazil play very similarly to fish in Australia, and fish in Australia play very similarly to fish in the United States. And they're not in a chat room. They're not having this conversation hive mind of we're all going to use these strategies. So something's got to be happening there. And to me, it's just based on, being instinctual and your emotions. So I think that term is that's what I'm sticking with moving forward is just
I like that.
They're instinctual poker players.
I like that. Yeah. I use the term studied when talking about or trying to qualify how good a person is. So when someone tells me a hand history and I think that the decision is close, my question is always well, how studied is this person? Right? Because looks can be deceiving. Just because the correct sizing was chosen, if you tell me that he's unstudied and just happened to choose that size, I know that size is imbalanced. So now I just follow the incentive trail, right?
Right.
It's okay, he chose 75% c-bet on this particular texture, and that's correct in theory. Well, how studied is he? Not at all. Oh, okay, he bets way too many hands then for this size, for sure.
Right.
100%, because his incentive is the c-bet, and he just happened to choose the correct size. Well, there's no fucking way that he just guessed. He just c-bets this size on this board texture because he saw it in a video.
Right.
He's doing it with way too many fucking hands, so let's get in there and start check raising.
Yeah. It's studied, unstudied. I think that's those are good terms too. Studied poker player, unstudied poker player. It's the archetype, the profile you're playing against certainly will have a dramatic compounding effect on, just on the overall strategy. And it's
well, think of the alternative too, right? You say, who is this guy? And they say he's a reg.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't tell me anything.
Right. What type of reg are they?
Right. Studied or is he unstudied?
Right.
Because that's going to alter my decision.
Yeah, the 8-9 hand that I told you about, right? I actually ran a solve for that, and I broke it down in a poker coaching video. And what I got to was on the flop, it was the poker Queen 5 suited was what the guy had. He had Queen 5 of diamonds. I don't even know if I said that before, but he turned a flush draw. My intuition was correct that he was going for a check raise, and I raise his river bet once it breaks out, and I go to the flop, and it's Queen 5 suited that I know he had. It's a data point that I know 1000% is not even in his flop range here. That's betting big. So how can you trust the rest of the outputs?
Right.
If we've already ruined it from step one, you just can't. So anyway, the person you're playing against absolutely matters and has a dramatic compounding effect on each and every strategy that goes deeper into the tree. All right. So what's a project you're working on that's near and dear to your heart?
All right, there's a couple. So I started a blog in 2015 when my mom died, and I basically started detailing my backstory. I got to freshman year of college, which was when my grandfather died, and for some reason I just haven't been able to write that blog, and it's just been stuck there for 5 years. I still consider it a work in progress. I'm going to get to it. I desperately want to finish that.
Why has it been such a struggle?
I think like it was hard in the moment to like recount that whole time frame. Like my granddad was just one of my idols, somebody that I truly looked up to, and I don't think that I was like ready to write it then. And once I put it off for like 6 months or whatever, it just became a dead project. Like I just got too busy with other things. I started Solve for Why. I was playing the big game, and I just couldn't ever circle back. So I'm really trying to find and make time to go back and revisit that. And then like more professionally speaking, I guess there's a lot under the hood at Solve for Why that we're working on. We have a documentary coming out next month, both on our site and PokerGo, called To Be Determined, where we followed a 1-2 grinder around for the better part of a year. I think it kind of details the other side, the non-successful side of what it's like to struggle through this game, trying to pay rent, living effectively check to check. So I'm pretty excited about that. And we've also been working on these whiteboard courses for the better part of a year that are finally getting ready to release. We're going to be putting them out for free. They're basically like introductory courses. So kind of like an intro to game theory heuristics. This is what pot odds are. This is what EV is. This is, how the mistakes that like, going back to what you said, intuitive players would make. And they're really well done. They're scripted. They are pure whiteboard the whole way to top to bottom. And they're like 3 minutes in length each. We have 7 courses that are, I believe, 5 lessons on average each for an entire curriculum. So, it ultimately breaks down to like 35, 40 courses that we're putting out for free.
That's sick, man. That's a lot of stuff. No wonder you have been so busy throughout the pandemic. That's a lot of projects that are all going on kind of simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think for my money, in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, the blog post about your grandfather, I think, is the one that resonates with me the most, and that I would look forward to consuming myself, just because, my grandfather, who's very luckily still kicking, nearing 80, was just such a major influence in my life. And I think at one point I bought a domain name called like legacyinterview.com or something like that, where I had this like idea of like just interviewing loved ones who were getting older, so that there would be like this piece of content to kind of remember them by whenever they passed away. And it just, legacies matter to me. And I love when people who are worthy of remembrance do get remembered after the fact. And yeah, so I'm totally on board with that. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I really need to do. I really enjoy writing, and I haven't done much of it in probably the last 5 years, just because I've been doing so much on film. But I think I would like to get back to it for a couple of reasons. One, just because it's an easy passion project, but 2, I think that a lot of my image misrepresented or misunderstood based on little snippets of what you get to see. So whether it's somebody only watching a couple of minutes of a Solve for Why video, or it's somebody reading 280 characters on Twitter, I don't think that it does a good job of telling the full story. So I think like the long form stuff that we do in general just depicts the way that I think, the way that I the world, the way I view this game, and all this other stuff much better. And I know it's only going to be a subset of people, a very small subset of people who are ever actually read this stuff, just like it's only a small subset that listen to the podcast or whatever. But I think it's important to me to at least that project and myself justice, and like put it out there in a well put together way.
I mean, it gives you dimension, right? I can say only from personal experience that like every interaction that I've ever had with Matt Berkey has been great. It's been a pleasure. It's been just an awesome experience. And, I don't know why there are people out there that just dunk on you because you're just one of the most generous human beings that I've ever met in the poker space that is filled with a shockingly amount of very, very generous human beings. And yeah, it's just always an honor, a pleasure having you on the podcast. I would, do anything to help solve for why. And you guys just keep, having record year after record year. I think that's something that I could very well get behind. And with that said, final question, which is kind of a silly question now that I'm at it, but where can the Chasing Poker Greatness audience learn more about Matt Berkey on the World Wide Web?
So all my socials are Berkey11. You can check out tv.solveforwhy.io for our training stuff. Obviously, we have our YouTube channel, which is just /solveforwhy on YouTube. And if you ever want to catch up on a 5-year-old blog that I will be starting again soon, I promise, the site is thevoicewithin.me.
Thevoicewithin.me. Yeah. Gonna hold you accountable. Gonna ask every month or so, yo, are you working on this project? Is it moving forward?
You know what? I'm so proud of the URL name that I just have to resurge it, I think. I was so I've never even heard of a .me extension, and to come up with I don't know. I was just very much patting myself on the back for that.
So now you're just paying for it year in and year out and not really doing much with it.
$6 a year, and it's dead. It's totally dead.
Well, it's not going to be dead. It's going to get resurrected in the near future, man. Obviously, you're going to be back on the show at some point. It's great. I can't wait for the pandemic to end so we can hang out in the real world. But yeah, with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you once again for your time and your energy. I'm very, very grateful and appreciative.
Thanks, man. This was great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. If you have yet to subscribe to the show, please take a second to do so on Apple Podcasts or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts may be. For more content from me, Coach Brad, please visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/enhanceyouredge, and I'll see you next time.